Hello, I'm Tim Loughton, Member of Parliament for East Worthing and Shoreham, and welcome to the latest of my podcasts. This is going to be the last of my podcasts ahead of the referendum on the EU this Thursday. Momentous day. Please do go and vote whichever way you're going to vote. It's the most important constitutional issue we've faced in the last 40 or more years. Now, it's been a long and often scrappy campaign, I'm afraid, and far too much on the negative side. And of course, it's drawing to a close in the most tragic of ways with the horrendous murder of my parliamentary colleague Joe Cox, who we will be remembering later on today in the House of Commons. Now, throughout this campaign, I've tried to concentrate on the positives, the positive vision of what I think could be our future if we vote to leave on Thursday, as I very much hope we will, and why it's absolutely safe to vote for leave for a better future for you, for your children, and for our country as a whole, and indeed for Europe too. Unfortunately, there have been too many scare stories in this whole campaign, particularly coming from the Remain campaign about the effect it's going to have on the economy, on pensions, on house prices, and yet on the other hand we're told that it's all a leap in the dark, but we have all these weird and wonderful predictions. It's extraordinary in some ways that after 43 years of being a member of the EC and then the EU, that they cannot articulate a positive vision of all the good things it's done and why we need to remain part of it in the future. It's all the negative scare stories of what would happen if we were to vote to come out. And it is, again, odd when we hear the Prime Minister going on about wanting to stay in, to battle, to fight our corner. But we have 27 partners. You don't fight your partners and your friends. You leave that for your enemies. So it's extraordinary after all this time. We are talking about battling, and we're talking about reform, which we've been talking about for years and years and years. And my patience has worn out, as I know many people around the country has as well. And it seems that the biggest case for Remain, just to sum it up, is, well, it's all a bit too complicated to come out. We've been a member for 43 years, so unravelling that relationship is going to be all just a bit too much. That if we do come out, then our European partners are all going to be a bit beastly to us, and it's all a bit of a leap into the dark. No mention of the reforms that the Prime Minister went to Europe to battle for, which is the basis on this whole referendum. This referendum is about whether we stay in a reformed Europe, but nobody seems to have talked about or even remember what those reforms were that the Prime Minister actually secured, and probably that's because they didn't actually amount to a row of beans at the end of the day that are going to make much of a difference in the future. So we've tried to make the case on the Leave side for why Britain has a global future, a future with the 6.9 billion people who live in the rest of the world outside of the EU, not just shackled to those 500 million people in those 28 EU countries. Why the EU is actually past its sell-by date. It's yesterday's game. It was forged in the 50s and 60s at the time of big trading blocs, big empires, the heart of the Cold War, and so on. And also because I think we need to believe in ourselves, that we need to believe in ourselves, to have control over our own laws and our own borders, that we need to work with our EU partners, whether we're inside or out. I believe in European unity. I want to be friends and trading partners still with our EU partners, but European unity is not the same as the EU. So this is my last minute attempt to convince those of you who haven't yet made up your mind or maybe wavering. I've got 10 bullet points here of the main reasons why I am going to be voting to leave on Thursday, and I urge you to do the same. I'll go through them quickly. First of all, killer statistic I've been using a lot in this campaign. 1 in 12 of the world's population is an Indian under the age of 28. That is where the future is. The big growing economies in the Far East in particular. Those are the people we should be trading with, dealing with, doing exchanges with. Yet we can't have a bilateral trade agreement with India whilst we're part of the EU. The EU has spent the last 9 years negotiating a trade agreement with India, and the whole thing has collapsed. And yet little old Liechtenstein, outside of the EU, has just negotiated one in just 6 months. We need to be there with India. We need to be negotiating a bilateral trade agreement. That's where our future is. Secondly, the regional fund, a third of the whole of the EU budget, something like 45 billion euros, goes on the regional fund. That's to help some of the poorer economies which have got difficult employment problems and so on, to try and raise them up. We're paying something like £5 billion for our share of the that regional fund. We get about 1.7, about a third of it back, and it goes on various projects in some of the poorer parts of the UK. But the vast majority of it goes to countries in Eastern Europe and the Mediterranean. But despite all of that, the youth unemployment rate in Greece is 51%. The youth unemployment rate in Spain is 45%. In Italy, it's 39%. So all that money is going to help those economies, and it's young people who are paying the price for failure. And in some cases, many of those young people have given up and they've moved abroad. Ireland has exported something like 300,000 of its young unemployed people, and they've come to countries like the UK. So the underlying figure is even worse than the figures I have given. Thirdly, the effect on business. British businesses have to abide by something like 3,000 regulations a year coming out of the EU. The cost of regulation on our business has been 176 billion. It's been calculated over the last 18 years, and about 3/4 of that originates in Europe. Yet 95% of British businesses, mostly small and medium-sized businesses, the lifeblood of our economy, don't trade with Europe. Yet 100% of them have to abide by those new rules and regulations. If we came out, we could choose the ones which are appropriate to us, to our businesses, to our consumers, our customers, our trading partners. And for workers' rights and things like that, most of the regulations actually came from the UK. So those are the sorts of things we would want to keep. Fourth, security. Again, it's been a bit annoying. People going on about, oh well, if you come out of the EU, then security is going to suffer. ISIL wants you to vote to leave. All this completely nonsensical stuff. The heart of our defence is NATO. We're a member of NATO, have been for a long time, along with countries like Canada, America and Turkey, which are not members of NATO. That is where our defence policy lies. And we share intelligence, particularly with the Five Eyes nations, who are America, Canada, Australia, New Zealand and the UK. We're part of Europol, but so are Americans and Australians, having their police officers at the Europol headquarters in Amsterdam, as I saw when I visited there a couple of months ago. And are we seriously saying that if the Belgian police, say, were to get wind of a terrorist cell operating on the Channel, that they wouldn't tell MI5 or Scotland Yard because we're not members of the EU anymore? That's a nonsense. Security is global. We need to be working with all our partners to defeat terrorism, money laundering, people trafficking and serious crime. Fifth, common agricultural policy. This one really gets people. We pay £4.2 billion into common agricultural policy. We get about £3 billion back in subsidies, largely to our farmers. We could use all of that £4.2 billion directly to pay subsidies to our farmers for those things we want our farmers to invest in, to grow, and those things in the best interest of consumers in the UK. We have one of the most efficient agricultural systems in the whole of Europe in the UK. We have one of the best animal welfare policies. I think we should be running it from London, not from Brussels. And there is a complete nonsense at the moment that we are paying into the common agricultural policy, which is subsidising East European dairy farmers to produce milk, which is then exported to the UK, undermining and undercutting UK dairy farmers who are really struggling to be able to produce their milk at cost price. That's a nonsense. I think we should be dealing directly with our farmers on our priorities. Sixth, common fisheries policy. Now this is something that really rankles in a coastal constituency like mine. 60% of the fish stocks in the North Sea, for example, are on British territorial waters. Yet British fishermen are only able to catch up to 25% of them. The rest gets hoovered up largely by French and Spanish factory fishing boats. That's a nonsense. I think our fishermen know best how to conserve and how to fish sustainably. They should have control of our territorial waters and our fishing stocks again, as we always used to. Trade deficit number 7. We have a £62 billion trade deficit with the EU at the moment. That means they buy £62 billion less of our stuff than we buy of theirs. So we've heard the scare stories. They're going to put up tariffs, they're going to put up boundaries. Well, you can only cut off your nose to spite your face once at all. And are we really suggesting that the Germans are going to say to us if we come out of the EU, oh, we're not going to sell you our BMWs anymore? Or the French are going to say, we're not going to sell you our wine anymore? Of course not. If you take a country like Switzerland, not a member of the EU, but Switzerland exports 4.5 times more per head of population to the EU than Britain does, and yet we are a member of the EU as well. And Switzerland has decided repeatedly not to become a member of the EU because they've calculated if they did, it will cost them 6 times as much as it would now being outside of the EU. So of course trade would keep on, but we can trade with the rest of the world much more easily as well, and we would have a seat back on the World Trade Organization, which we had to give up when we became part of the EU. 8th, immigration. We've heard a lot about immigration. We're not against immigration, but we're against uncontrolled immigration. We need to be able to take back control of our borders, to determine how many people come into this country and the skills base of people coming to this country, so they're people who can contribute most of all. And actually, as it stands, we've got a discriminatory immigration policy, because if you've got a first-class software developer from India or an excellent medic from the Philippines, for example, they are second best, second choice to an EU citizen who can automatically come into this country. Last year we had a net increase of immigration of 333,000 people. We feel it in the southeast more than most because we're a densely populated part of the country. 25,000 school-age children from EU countries came into the UK. That is just not sustainable. So we need to be able to come out of the EU, to take back control of our borders, to decide who and how many people we can sustainably continue to take into our country. That may be more than we're taking at the moment in 1 year. It may be fewer, but it's up to us, our government, democratically accountable, to decide how many and who. 9th, the EU's just not working. The EU's share of world trade is just 60% of what it was back in 1990, and we're becoming less and less competitive. The rest of the world is moving ahead, we're moving backwards. We're spending too much of our time sitting around tables in Brussels, coming up with more and more regulations which make it harder for our businesses to get out there and compete, when we should be on the other side of the globe competing with the big emerging economies, getting a bigger share of the world's wealth for us, and it's just not happening. There's a £20 billion black hole in the EU budget. No doubt after the referendum is over, if we are still in, we'll be told how we're going to have to contribute towards that as well. I'm afraid the Eurozone remains in crisis. The problems in Greece and Portugal have not gone away. We will be part of the effects of that crisis. And 10th, this is about democracy. The first job of a government is to defend its citizens and to levy taxes in order to provide services. So do you want our country in the future to be run by this place where you elected me, or do you want to be run by Europe, by Brussels, by a bureaucracy of 33,000 people and 5 presidents who nobody is actually able to name, let alone be able to elect or know how to get rid of? This is a once-in-a-generation vote on Thursday. What happens now will be a legacy for future generations. Just as this government has tried to mop up the economic failures of the past, to get down our debt so that future generations, our children and grandchildren, are not saddled with the effects of that, this vote is about the legacy that you are handing on to your children and grandchildren as well. The EU is past its sell-by date. It's no longer fit for purpose. It's time to take back control. It's time to stop being little Europeans and take our place back in the big, wide world of 6.9 billion people. I'm in favour of European unity. I'm in favour of having a strong relationship still with our European partners, but European unity is not the same as the European Union. That's why on Thursday we need to get out there and vote. We need to vote to leave and to take back control, and I hope you'll do that. And I'm grateful if you've listened to all my podcasts over the last few weeks, and I hope that they've helped you to make a better informed decision, one way or the other, of how you're going to vote. Thank you for listening.